Got a little short story for you to start us off this morning. It's a little story about four people. These four people are named everybody, somebody, anybody, and nobody. Some of you may have heard this story. There was an important job to be done, and everybody was sure that somebody would do it. Anybody could have done it, but nobody did it. Somebody got angry because it was everybody's job. Everybody thought that anybody could do it, but nobody realized that everybody wouldn't do it. It ended up that everybody blamed somebody when nobody did what anybody could have done. Isn't that like life, where we know something needs to be done, that should be done, but it doesn't get done? We tend to sit back and wait and watch, and maybe somebody will take care of it. We know anybody could do it, but somebody will get around to it. I think it's amazing how we can sit back and watch, and it's part of natural human behavior. But of course, we usually wait till someone gets fed up and gets it done. And we're like, whoo, we're glad somebody took care of that. Something that anybody could have done. Everybody had the opportunity, but no one did until someone had enough. Arnold Schwarzenegger usually makes the news because of a movie or because he used to be governor of California, but he made news recently because he got fed up that nobody was taking care of a pothole on the street, and so he filled the pothole himself. A job that somebody had, but anybody could have done, and everybody had the opportunity, but he decided that he was going to fix it. But why? When there's things we know, whether it's in our spiritual lives, whether it's church or at work or at home or any number of scenarios, we tend to naturally wait for someone else to do something that maybe we could do. Or maybe more specifically, God has called us to do. The thing is, we naturally, our typical first answer is, well, I'm too busy. Right? Now, there is such a thing as appropriate boundaries, but sometimes we're too busy to do anything. Even if God were to interrupt, sometimes are just too busy even for God. And of course, there's this thing called the bystander effect, which by definition means that the more people are around, even though they see the problem, they know it should be addressed, the more people are around, the less likely anybody who sees it is going to address it. And there's been plenty of studies on that, even for those who are in danger, even for those who have been murdered. When there's been a lot of spectators, people tend to stand back. And nowadays, of course, people will pull out their cell phones and they'll want to videotape it. Even if someone who is in need, who is in trouble, we will typically stand back, wait, and watch, and think somebody will intervene. Somebody will intercede for that person. But also, too, in our consumeristic culture, in our mindset, sometimes we want stuff so catered to us for people to adjust to us that we will sit back and wait for it to change for us. And if it doesn't, we what? Complain. Why isn't somebody doing it? Can I get a witness? That's right. But on the other side of that is that sometimes when we do something, somebody else will complain about the job we did, that we didn't do it their way. I mean, it got done, right? We got taken care of, but the thing is, sometimes we just don't want to deal with the hassle of being congratulated with complaints. So why would I want to deal with that? And of course, with mob mentality and personal attacks, or even attempting to do it, why would we want to put ourselves through that? So we'll wait and watch, and hopefully someone else will take care of it. But the thing is, again, what if God has called you to take care of the problem? For you to rise up to the challenge, for you to model the example. Because we can't say when God calls us to do something, say, well, I'll do it when somebody else or when enough people do it. We can't give God excuses like we talked about last week. God calls and recruits those who are willing to be a part of his correction in the world. And we see one of those calls in our scripture this morning with the call of Samuel, which is part of a pretty popular call. But part of the scenario is this, is that Israel had been in the promised land for a couple centuries, and they have been going this back and forth, where they've been unfaithful, they've gotten in trouble, God has rescued them, and then they'd be faithful for a while. Things would be good, they'd slide back, get into trouble because of their unfaithfulness, God would rescue them, and then they would be faithful again. This back and forth, and now they are in a situation where they are sliding back into unfaithfulness. It says, as in our opening passage, that visions were rare. No one has really heard a word from the Lord for a long time. In fact, Eli, who is described to being blind, is actually a literal and a symbolic description of the spiritual blindness of the people of Israel. That they were just as blind spiritually as Eli was physically. And on top of that, Eli was the chief priest. He was supposed to be in charge and guard the sacredness and the integrity of the tabernacle where God resided right there on top of the ark. He was to make sure everything happened the way it was supposed to, yet his sons violated the ordinances and the requirements of the sacrifices. They would take the meat and do whatever they wanted to do with it, even though God gave specific instructions on how worship was supposed to take place. And on top of that, Eli's sons treated the tabernacle like the red light district, like their own personal brothel. And so Eli, who was supposed to correct his sons and protect the tabernacle, does neither. And so God says he is going to provide correction. He is going to judge Eli and his sons, and he is going to make sure Israel gets back on the right path. And so in this period where the word of the Lord was rare, and there were not many visions, which Eli was supposed to be receiving, but he was not being faithful, we have this description of there was one night, Eli is lying in his usual place. The lamp of God had not yet gone out because it's supposed to be lit, continuously. It's not supposed to stop. And it says Samuel was lying down in the house of the Lord, which tells us that in the tabernacle, the part of which would eventually be the temple, where the menorah was, which is the lamp, Samuel was lying right down next to it. And Eli is laying in his usual spot, which tells us that he was not tabernacle. He was somewhere else. He could have been maybe 100 yards or so away. And so we even got a picture here that Samuel is in the right spot. Eli is not. He is outside, disconnected. And Samuel, who is sleeping, he is feet away from the ark. He is right next to the menorah, right next to the table of the presence. And all of a sudden he hears the call, Samuel. Now, it's got an exclamation mark there, so we got to think, Samuel. Got to get him to wake up. And Samuel, of course, is a good kid. He's willing, and he wants to, do his job, and so he thinks he hears Eli, so it says he gets up and he runs to Eli. Yes, here I am. What you need? And now I know for you parents who have ever been woken up by a child in the middle of the night can feel for Eli. What are you doing? I didn't call you. Go back and lay down. Samuel probably was a little flustered and like, well, what in the world? So he comes back into the tabernacle. He lays back down next to the lamp of God, right in front of the ark. And all of a sudden, Samuel, he gets up and runs again. Eli, hey, what you need? You need some water? I can get you some water. I didn't call you. Parents, you mean you're there? Kid, what are you doing? I remember as a kid that one time I woke up my parents. This is one of my earliest memories of prying open the eyes of my dad. I imagine that some of the irritation that probably was happening with Eli when it comes to Samuel, because Eli, he's outside of the tabernacle. He didn't hear the voice. I didn't call you. Go back and lie down. Samuel comes back and goes to a spot, hopefully, which was still warm, lays down. And then a third time, Samuel gets up, and he hurries back to Eli. Hey, what do you need? And Samuel finally gets it. Eli finally gets it. Eli, who's supposed to know that God speaks, that God works, that God talks to his people, out the third time finally understands that Samuel is hearing God. He's not just hearing voices, that God is intervening right there, right now, right there in the middle of the night. Eli, who should have caught it the first time, it takes him 3 times to realize what is going on. And then he tells Samuel, go back, lay down. When you hear the voice again, answer right where you are. The Lord is talking to you. Which I think it probably would surprise Samuel a little bit, because if the spiritual status of Israel and the high priest is so low to be considered blind, that he probably didn't even realize that you could have a personal relationship with God, that you could actually talk to God, he would listen, and sometimes he will talk back. And so I imagine for Samuel, this is an amazing revelation. God is talking to me. And so he goes back, he lays down, and then he gets the 2 calls, Samuel, Samuel, and it says God showed up and stood there. And Samuel, I imagine he sat up real quick like, here I am, Lord. Here I am. Wouldn't that be awesome? In the middle of the night, well, some of you probably might freak out in the middle of the night. But any time of moment of prayer, of silence, to hear God call your and my name. But the thing is, as we see in the scripture, Samuel was in the right spot to hear from God. Eli was in the wrong spot. Samuel was in the right position. Eli was in the wrong position. Eli was focused on himself and his family. Samuel was concerned about God, his house, and making sure this lamp that was never supposed to go out, that it stays lit, that it's going to get the oil that it needs. And because Samuel's heart was towards God, he was in the position not just physically, but spiritually to hear God's voice. Because if Israel was in a spiritual slump, if Israel was stuck in the mud, if they were experiencing injustice and unrighteousness and all the things that was wrong, even in the tabernacle, y'all, God was going to use Samuel to provide a course correction for Israel. We got to imagine how bad things are in Israel at this time. If they are sliding down spiritual, and in the priests, the pastors of the tabernacle are abusing the gifts. They're skimming from the offerings, and they're using the church as a brothel. Things are wrong, y'all. If that happened here, I imagine there would be some pitchfork chasing. Can I get a witness? Come on now. Things are off. But in 21st century America, we can look around and we see things that are wrong, not just on the national politics, which is very easy to do, but we know things that are going wrong in our community, in our neighborhoods, in our families, in our state. Regardless of the context, regardless of the location, we see things that are off. We see things that are wrong, that need to be corrected. And maybe, just maybe, if we put ourselves in the position like Samuel, spiritually and physically, when we see those things that are wrong, God will say, your name here, and say, I'm going to send you to correct the problem. I'm going to use you to provide the course correction. God called and raised up Samuel to use him in a mighty and powerful way, to draw people back to God, to start correcting what was going wrong at the tabernacle, to make sure that when the time was right, when they were going to call for a king, that they were going to choose who God wanted, not who they selfishly wanted. Because it's easy to get selfish and think about me, myself, and I, and do the things I like and the way I want it. And then we get so skewed religiously and spiritually that, again, we, like Eli, become blind. Just kind of further describe how blind Eli was. This is the high priest. This is the guy who's supposed to be the most spiritual and religious person in Israel. Is that when Hannah, before Samuel was born, Hannah, who was praying for a child, when she came into the tabernacle and was praying, and the scripture tells us that Eli's response was, "Lady, you're drunk, get out of here." Why was the high priest calling someone who's praying drunk and tells them to leave? So we know things are off, and so God sees it, and he calls Samuel, someone who was willing, someone who was faithful, someone who was eager to do what God wanted. And so to know God is also to know his will, and then to put himself in the position of his will to be able to change what is wrong, to do their peace, to do our peace, to provide the course correction. God invites us every single day to put ourselves into position to hear from him and follow him so that we can be part of the change. One of the biggest things that stood out to me during my master's degree was I took a class on urban issues. And I really didn't feel called to the urban church, but I wanted to just, learn, grow, expand. And one of the things that stood out to me during that class is that, of course, there's always a lot of reading. But it's one thing to read a book about something, it's another thing to experience it. One of the places we went to was in one of the roughest parts of Kansas City. And by rough, I mean gunfire is a regular thing. A very dangerous place to live, let alone visit. And we went to visit a charter school that was started by a group of teachers because they wanted to bring back education back into this neighborhood to provide the kids the opportunity to escape poverty. And actually also part of their hope, if I recall correctly, was to also then come back and improve the community. But these teachers, you see, they didn't just drive in from Olathe or Overland Park or Lenexa. They moved there. They moved into the neighborhood where there's gunfire. They moved into the neighborhood where it was not safe to be out at night. Because they had a heart and felt a call for God, for them to impact that community. And I tell you what, y'all, I think I was 22 years old, 23 years old when I took this class. And for one of them to have an infant child, and to say, there are times where we have to grab the baby and lay on the floor when we hear the gunfire. But they felt the call to make a change, to be the change in that neighborhood. Not to be some folks who come in and leave, but to be there, to buy a home, to clean it up, to invest in those people so that maybe one day the kids who have been living there and the kids who are going to live there would experience a fundamental transformation to maybe one day there won't be any more gunfire. One day there will be a grocery store that comes back in that part of the town. For the people in the neighborhood to rise up out of poverty. Willing to go all the way because God laid on their heart to do something about it. That only they, through the educational powers that they could give to children, they said yes. Now that's a bit of an extreme example. But every day, you and I, we look around where we are at, within our families, within our neighborhoods, with our community, and we see pain. We see problems. We see the next challenges. We see the next obstacles. And yet, I imagine if we put ourselves in position like Samuel, we will hear the same invitation for us. To maybe do one thing, to participate in one part that might relieve somebody else out of poverty, that might alleviate the drug problem, that might help a kid feel and experience their worth. It might maybe help a man or woman who's felt invisible all their life to finally be seen. Like Samuel, like the prophets, and like the apostles, you and I are invited to be a part of the change, to bring in the kingdom agenda of God's work, that Jesus announced in his very first public sermon and unleashed the apostles in the Great Commission. The call for you and me to be the change, to live the example, and to point to the one who offers healing, who offers hope, who offers community, connection, and love. God uses faithful people to address frustrating problems. And so maybe that discontent, maybe that dissatisfaction that you see in something that's going on that's wrong, maybe that's God prompting you to do something about it. And let me tell you this, because I need to make sure it is clear. You do not need my permission. You laugh, but you do not need my permission. If God has called you to it, I will bless you, I will support you, and help you with anything that you need. You don't have to filter anything through me. If he has said it is so, then it is so. And that is an invitation for you and for me to help you accomplish that goal, to accomplish that task, to share that love with somebody in Coffee County and the world. And so, as I've shared a version of this before, what I ask you then today to do is, if you have an idea, to bring it up, to share it. I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, I said there might be somebody you're sitting next to, or else somebody else sitting in this room, who God may also be putting the same idea in their mind, placing it on their heart. And so my invitation, along with God's invitation for you to be the change, is let's get together and let's make an impact. We have seen all that we have done so much already, and I know God has so much more for you and for me. So let's do it. Let's get on it. It's amazing what Jesus says. He says, come and see, and then he'll say, go and do. And so this morning, like every morning, hopefully we will invite people to come and see. But when we go out these doors, let's go and do.